when I came back to being an artist in 1985 after a gap, it was on the basis that I would make no predictions, I would have no message to give to anyone, I would see what the work showed me. And certainly politics would come into it, because that was all around. Art history could come in, the history of looking could come in, family questions could come in. All of this was raw material that could come into the studio. Everything was allowed in, and then one would discover what came out. So certainly one's biography, both intimate and public, in the sense of how you are in the society and where you fit into it, are there in the work, and those trajectories do shape how one makes sense of the world. The new Soho film's been a long time and is still under construction. I knew from a long time ago that one of the things I was going to be working on were these informal miners, these artisanal miners, which in South Africa we call Zama Zama. So you have the huge industrial mining, which was shown in the Soho film, mine of thousands of people coming out of the mine shaft, of drills, of explosions, very organized. And what you have now is that more and more mines closing down, fewer and fewer employed, and tens of thousands of people doing their own mining, finding a place where there used to be gold and either going underground, but instead of having all the safety precautions and the high tech and all the conditions of the organized industrial mining, they're kind of on their own, literally, 2 meters in a ditch underground with a hammer and a chisel hitting at a rock, taking a bag of rock home, getting a piece of concrete to grind the rock into a powder, putting the powder in water in a pan and letting the heavier gold settle, mixing it by hand with mercury to separate the gold out, and then taking a little pellet of golden mercury and selling it to an illegal gold dealer who will filter it into the formal gold sector. So this sense of the informal economy having to support the formal economy is very prevalent in South Africa, and I think it's a premonition of what's going to be so much of the economy of the world, where globalization means that an elite and a small working class are relatively better and better off, and the vast majority of people have to find other ways outside of the formal economy to survive. And then at a certain point, the formal economy latches onto that and is subsidized by the informal economy. And then the collapse of public institutions like my much beloved Johannesburg Art Gallery, which is in a state of terminal decline. So it's about Soho in that gallery and the miner underground. What quite that means, I don't know yet. I haven't yet found the final shape. This one is about the making of it, so it's a mixture of the animation and then switching the camera on to film myself drawing it, and sometimes it's the real drawing and sometimes it's rubbish drawing. But sometimes the rubbish drawing makes the most interesting drawing and then gets used. So you can't always predict. So this is a ridiculous piece of charcoal, but actually I found it's very nice to draw. So it starts as a joke, but now I use it a lot. It's from a palm tree, a branch of a palm tree.
Der neue Soho-Eckstein-Film, der noch nicht abgeschlossen ist, dass wir den hier zeigen können, ist für mich ehrlich gesagt eine Sensation und ein Traum. Für mich gehört er zu den wirklich ganz, ganz relevanten Künstlern heute, weil es ihm gelingt, ganz viel von unseren Problemen, von den Dingen, die uns beschäftigen als Menschen, in sein Werk hineinpackt. Und zwar so, dass es nie eine Illustration ist, sondern die ganzen Wunden unserer Zeit, die sind in seinem Werk vorhanden.
We're in the room of the early drawing, and some of these I haven't seen for 30 years. I had two periods of drawing. I worked as an artist between 1975 and 1981 and then stopped. Worked in film and theatre, and when I came back to making drawings, this was the first drawing. Made not knowing what it meant, but I thought I don't have to know what it means in advance. I'll discover what it is. And that made for an opening up of the possibilities of anything being potentially in a drawing. So it's based on a photo by the French photographer Brassai, just with the Papino added in.
It was instant.
Yeah, it's just in storage. It will be on the exhibition in Cape Town. It's not this one, it's a similar arc, half the size. This is too big. So the painting here is a family portrait. Obviously it's of myself, my wife Anne, my father, my mother, my grandmother, and objects that are in the family house, what was then my parents' house, which is now my house, but a kind of Cycladic head, a terracotta sculpture by Ben Arnold, the fireplace which is still in the house as we use it now, the same doors as it is. Obviously it's a sense of time passing in the portraits, and some of the people no longer alive. But I'm astonished at the color. I think, what was I thinking with that color? I think at that stage, the belief was if you were an artist, you were going to work with oil paint on canvas. And so I thought, well, while I'm still working out how to do that, I'll keep drawing in charcoal with the expectation they would turn into oil paintings. And it took a long time for me to realize that they will never turn into oil paintings.
Bei ihm ist das Frühwerk, wie fast bei jedem Künstler, die Quelle, wo man das Werk dann insgesamt verstehen kann. Migration, überhaupt die Geschichte als Prozess von sich abfolgenden Bildern, Ereignissen. Und so erleben wir ja unsere Zeit, ja, die Bilder, die an uns vorbeifließen quasi. Und ich glaube, dieses fast allegorische, wie er Geschichte anschaut und immer so wirklich sehr vielschichtig seine Kunst versteht und definiert, das finde ich sehr beeindruckend.
If you look at the Soho films over 30 years, they do correspond to different moments, to the violence of the first democratic elections, to the AIDS crisis, to xenophobic attacks. So those are kind of, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the big questions that we were thinking about in South Africa, which filter through in the sometimes in direct, sometimes in indirect ways. Some have one megaphone, some have got two bicycle wheels like a turns, and then it turns the megaphones. Okay, that's fine. I think that's good. That's beautiful there, yeah. So this is the room of the studio. It's not trying to recreate what my studio in Johannesburg feels like, except in that it is a room of excess. Too many different things, too many different projects. And the studio is a Tummelplatz. Tummelplatz is the Freud's term for the space between the analyst and the patient in which all is allowed. There's a kind of a jousting space, a place for tumbling. There's an openness for all things to appear and find their meaning. We didn't ever use it. The studio is also a place about investigating the nature of seeing. So the stereoscopes, the different kinds of stereoscopes, this kind that you look down into and other ones, more familiar old ones, are also about the construction of an image and of meaning in your head. So the studio is also a kind of an expanded head, what's inside your head. Instead of thoughts moving 5 centimeters across from one part of your brain to another, they're thoughts moving 8 meters from one side of the studio to the other. So it includes lithographic prints, collage, woodcuts, wooden sculptures, mechanical sculptures, bronze sculptures, drawings, sound pieces, all in this very contained space. So it should feel like kind of the brain of the exhibition. The head and the load came out of the project which we'd done in Rome, in which we'd done a procession across 500 meters of the Tiber River. From the work I'd done on the Alban opera Wozzeck, the theme of the First World War had emerged. And so it became a long procession with shadows about the First World War, but about Africa also.
Why should I hesitate? I must go and die for my king and my country. Why should I go? I am getting a good salary.
So once we got into the theme, it was a series of explorations, workshops in Johannesburg, with musicians and actors testing sound, the sound world, the text world. It was about Europe and Africa having this incomprehensible meeting during the First World War. And of course it became about ongoing questions of colonialism and where we are today. The whole piece is about history as collage, both in terms of images, in terms of understanding. We always try to make an apparent coherence out of fragments, which is the way the world occurs and appears. And we take these fragments and we try to make a linear line of history, a single understanding, which is always provisional and always a construction. So the cutting up of the continent of Africa in the performance was done using the Kurzwitter's Ursonata, which is a poem of nonsense, of words that don't make sense, of phrases, of sounds. For people in Africa, it was noise coming from that side. They were going to be eaten by one European country or another. It was about Europe not understanding what Africa was saying and Africa not believing what it heard from Europe. When Josef Helfenstein, the curator and director of the museum, suggested to put some of the drawing lessons in those rooms, I thought, oh, let me make one specifically for Basel. And that meant taking images. So the images of Paul Klee, the Grunewald, the two portraits of Erasmus are all from the collection. So each time I see an exhibition or I look at old things, there's an impulse to be back in the studio. Every work is both about the moment it's made, but it always has a relationship to what your eye has seen throughout your life. And so it's always a conversation with previous images. And understanding that one's eye is shaped, that the way one sees and the way one hears is not the way people would have 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Each side, pushed in. It feels fantastic to be in that company. The pleasure of repainting old masters just very quickly, very roughly, so they could sit behind. And I could happily spend a year repainting old masters in Indian ink.
Learning from the Old Masters ist ja eine neue Arbeit von ihm. Gehört zu diesen Drawing Lessons, nennt er sie. Das sind so fast dadaistisch angehauchte Selbstreflexionen, wo er in Kurzfilmen quasi sich über sich selbst lustig macht in gewisser Weise. Das heißt eigentlich auch seinen künstlerischen Alltag, die Banalität dessen, was es heißt, Künstler zu sein und blockiert zu sein und nicht wissen, was man jetzt zeichnen soll oder so. Das thematisiert er.
This is a lesson about learning from the old masters. Sit up straight and consider your responses. What is your view on the double logic of art? Or to put it differently, on the double responsibilities of the artist?
Er bezieht sich eigentlich auf einen Text von Erasmus, nämlich das Lob der Torheit. Und das ist natürlich eigentlich wie ein Grundthema auch in seinem Werk, ja? Ein Bezug auf unsere Zeit, auf die Zeitgeschichte, auf die Allgegenwart von Torheit in allem, was der Mensch produziert. Und übrigens ist das eines der meistgelesenen Werke der Weltliteratur, dieses 500 Jahre alte Stück von Erasmus. Und er bezieht sich dann darauf.
The text is Erasmus in Praise of Folly, which is a kind of a very sophisticated satire. It's full of wordplay. It's it allows the absurd a space inside these big theological debates that were raging at the time.
Magis imo sapere potius, ut in haec esset senti. Have you studied the golden mean? Have you studied the laws se stoici quidem isti voluptarem ad sperantur?
The basic idea and concept of drawing lessons come from contemporary editing techniques in which it's very easy to split a screen and double and have two figures in the same space. So it made it possible to do these duets of myself kind of interrogating myself to see what is there. And so it's a long-term kind of self-portrait project. The principle of the absurd and Dada is vital for these. And some of them are still too sober, but it's like a break. It's a 2-day break in the studio when I want to do one. And then it's usually filmed on my own in the evening when no one else is around to see the stupidity. Trying to, in the second filming, remember what had happened in the first to get a vague timing, and then relying on an editor to slow things down, speed things up to find the right juxtaposition. I think the first shadow procession came in a theatre production of Wozzeck on the Highveld, made with Handspring Puppet Company, in which the puppeteers showed me ways of making these jointed paper puppets, which then went into shadow procession. And the idea of processions has continued for 30 years. Each time I think I've done the last procession, another one emerges. It's something about being able to show the range of the world, the range of people. If you have a procession coming towards you, then you just see the front row the whole time, getting closer and closer. But if it's a lateral procession, you can multiply and expand the range of people that are seen. So it's a kind of an archive of the world. Procession becomes a very flexible form. It's in a way, it's also like a roll of film, a line of film that's being slowly moved in front of people. So it has a sense of the passage of time as well as people. When you're working with a jointed paper puppet, you have the legs, you have a torso, you have a waist, and you have a head with little wire joints between them. So you can bend each section, the legs, as you want to do it. And you can think, oh, I want an image of someone who's bent forward carrying a heavy load. But it's not always automatic to know, well, what do you say to a person? How do they have to stand? Or how do you have to draw it? But if you move the objects, you move it until you say, now I recognize it. And you say, no, that back doesn't feel right. I'm not sure why. Is it too straight? Is it too bent? And you shift it, and as you shift it, you say, now I believe that. So that's what you recognize, something that's very specific, even though you couldn't describe it in advance. The long vitrine with the laser-cut paper figures was made to find the order, the editing of the procession. The figures in the procession range from all periods of Roman history, from the founding of Rome with the myth of Romulus and Remus, right up to the death of migrants trying to reach Europe from Africa, an image of a Roman trireme ship with its oars. So it's a history of things that are both shameful and triumphant, hence the title of the work. Archives in general are about hiding material from the public rather than making it accessible. My own archive is there in the form of photographs of all the work that's been done from a certain point. But it also exists in the sense that it's a storeroom full of old pictures and a lot of photostats and photographs and drawers full of fragments of texts. So all of that raw material is there each time a project starts. One can open a drawer and take out and throw on the table 200 phrases and start almost with those, knowing that at the end of the project, very few of those will be used, but it gives you something physical to work with. So it's a kind of an outsourced memory. I'm much more an analog person. I mean, I cannot write on a computer. If I have to write an essay or a note, it's always longhand in a notebook with a fountain pen.
Kuna manje